welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really common: overthinking. You know that feeling. Your brain just won't switch off, constantly replaying conversations, imagining, well, the worst case scenarios for everything, going over tiny decisions again and again. It's just exhausting, isn't it? Especially now, the world moves so fast, there's so much input, it feels like our minds just get jammed. And this overthinking, it's not just tiring, it can actually stop us in our tracks, paralyze us, and honestly, it can steal some of the joy from life. So our mission today is to really break down what the materials you've shared with us suggest about why this happens, and maybe more importantly, what strategies those sources offer for, hitting the brakes. And I'm joined by a fantastic guide to help us explore these sources.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, diving into the articles and research you sent over, it's really clear this is a big struggle for a lot of people. The sources definitely highlight that.
Absolutely. It really jumped out how consistently this theme appeared. So let's start with the why. The materials really hammer home how widespread this feels today. What did you see in the sources about the root causes?
Well, one thing that popped up again and again, especially in pieces talking about modern life, is just the sheer volume of information. One article talked about the digital deluge, social media, news alerts, endless choices for everything. Your notes even pulled out a bit about cognitive load, basically our brains being overwhelmed.
Yeah, I remember that part. It feels like that constant stream of stuff, like that article described, leads straight to analysis paralysis. Our brains just stall out trying to sort through it all.
Exactly. And then layered on top of that, several sources, like that research summary you included, mentioned growing societal pressure. This idea that we have to make the perfect choice, optimize everything, always be achieving. One source specifically framed that fear of messing up, of not getting it exactly right, as major fuel for the overthinking fire.
Oh, that fear aspect. That was really strong in the materials, wasn't it? I think one piece focusing on cognitive biases really zeroed in on fear. Fear of failing, fear of being judged, just fear of the unknown.
Right. And another paper discussed the brain's protective function, how it evolved to keep us safe from actual physical danger. But now it goes into overdrive, anticipating bad social outcomes or work problems that are frankly often pretty unlikely. Right? It's trying to protect us by mapping out every potential negative thing. But as that paper pointed out, it usually just ends up keeping us stuck, anxious and stuck.
Huh. It's like our wiring is a bit outdated for the world we live in now. Okay, so the sources give us a pretty clear picture of why we might be overthinking. Let's shift then. What about the practical side? What strategies did the materials highlight to actually, manage this?
Yeah, there are some really concrete techniques. One I thought was particularly useful, mentioned on one of the sources, was like a pattern interrupt. It's a bit like that 5-second rule idea some people talk about, but for thoughts. So when you catch yourself starting to spiral, starting to overthink, the suggestion was to just sort of acknowledge the thought for maybe 5 seconds, no judgment, and then consciously, deliberately shift your focus.
Physically even?
Shifting focus.
Yeah.
Right. The source gave examples, didn't it? Like, look around the room, name 5 things you see. Or focus just on your breathing for a moment. Or even just plan dinner. Simple stuff.
Exactly. Simple stuff. It's not about wrestling the thought into submission, because that rarely works. Yeah. It's more about creating a pause, a redirection, like hitting a circuit breaker on that thought pattern before it gains momentum.
A mental circuit breaker. I like that framing. It feels actionable. Okay, what else? Another strategy seemed to come up in a couple of places, I think, more about challenging the thoughts. Yes, exactly. One source called it the reality check. This one is aimed squarely at those loops fueled by, really unlikely worst-case scenarios, catastrophizing. It suggested asking yourself 2 key questions right then and there. First, is this thought actually based on facts? Or is it just an assumption, a feeling? Yeah. And second, okay, what's the most likely thing to happen here based on past experience or evidence, not just the absolute worst thing I can imagine?
And there was that really good example in one of the pieces about someone convinced they'd lose their job after a presentation.
Yes, that was a great illustration. The source described walking this person through those questions. What actual facts suggest you'll be fired? Turns out there were none. And what's the most likely outcome, given you usually do well in presentations? Well, probably another decent presentation. It helps you see when the fear is just, blown way out of proportion. It grounds you.
Pulls you back from those wild what-ifs. Okay, those are 2 really solid techniques from the material, the pattern interrupt, and the reality check. Now, thinking about the notes you included and some themes I saw across the sources, you flagged 2 really common overthinking traps. One was about social stuff, right? replaying interactions.
Yes. The post-event debrief from hell, basically.
Yeah.
One source, I think it was a blog post about social confidence, had specific tips for that. It talked about doing a perspective shift. So when you're cringing, replaying something awkward you said, ask yourself, okay, realistically, out of everyone else there, how many people are still thinking about that one thing I said?
And the answer is usually pretty close to zero, right? Because everyone else is wrapped up in their own stuff.
Exactly. They're worried about what they said or what they're having for lunch tomorrow. It puts your moment into perspective. That same source also brought in self-compassion. It basically asks, how would you talk to a good friend who's beating themselves up over the same thing? You probably wouldn't keep telling them how awkward they were. You'd be kind, reassuring. So try offering that same kindness to yourself. It can really help break that negative replay loop.
That's a powerful reframe. Treating yourself like you treat a friend. Seems obvious, but we rarely do it. Okay, and the other big area you noted from the materials was about overthinking major decisions, career changes, things like that, getting stuck.
Yes, decision paralysis. That came up in the source, focused on making choices. It acknowledged, big decisions are tough. It suggested starting with something familiar, like a pro-con list. But then it added this interesting layer, the gut check. So after you do the logical analysis, step away, go for a walk, meditate, whatever clears your head, then come back and just check in with your gut feeling, your intuition. The argument was that our intuition often picks up on things subconsciously, even before our rational brain finishes crunching the numbers.
So it's like using both parts of your brain, the logic and the feeling part. And didn't that source also have that really punchy phrase about perfection?
Yes. Perfection is the enemy of good. That was it. The point being, chasing some mythical perfect decision often means you make no decision. You just stay stuck. A good enough decision that you actually make and act on is way better than the perfect one you never reach.
Perfection is the enemy of good. That really hits home for decision paralysis, doesn't it? It feels like a really central theme then running through a lot of these materials, is that overthinking keeps you inactive. And maybe that inaction is the real problem.
Absolutely. That came through strongly in several places. Action, even really small action, is framed as the antidote. If you're overthinking starting a new hobby, one source suggested, don't agonize about committing for a year. Just sign up for one single class. Make one phone call, the smallest possible step.
Right. Take the first tiny step. And that, according to these sources, starts to build momentum. It shifts you out of your head and into, doing something. Builds a bit of confidence, maybe.
Precisely. You replace the endless what-ifs with actual experience.
Wow. Okay. This has been incredibly helpful, really digging into these materials. It's quite striking how these different sources, kind of converge on the problem, but also offer these complementary solutions. So just to quickly recap the main strategies we pulled from your sources, we talked about the sheer amount of information and that pressure to be perfect fueling it all. Then practical tools like the pattern interrupt to break the thought loops, the reality check to ground yourself in facts, not fear. For social awkwardness, the perspective shift, and trying some self-compassion. And for those big decisions, using the pro-con list, but adding that gut check and remembering perfection is the enemy of good. And kind of overarching all of that, the idea found across the board that action is the key. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that today. Really valuable insights.
Oh, my pleasure. It was fascinating to connect the dots between the different materials you shared. Lots of practical wisdom there.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. So here's a little challenge for you this week based on everything we've just discussed from these sources. Just pick one thing. Maybe it's trying that 5-second pattern interrupt next time you spiral. Or maybe using the reality check questions when you start catastrophizing. Or even just trying that gut check on a small decision you've been putting off. Pick one technique highlighted in these materials and just try it intentionally. See what happens. See what shifts when you actively try to quiet that noisy brain, even just for a moment. Remember, as these sources strongly suggest, your thoughts don't have to run the show. And taking action, even tiny action, can make a huge difference. You've got this.